We are marching in the light of God. We are marching in the light of God. We are marching. We are marching. We are marching in the light of God. We are marching. Welcome everybody. It's so wonderful to be together. How awesome to be together as brothers and sisters from all sorts of communities and backgrounds. And I know the multitudes are going to expand as we get to the Library Committee's Wavelength program with Simone Zelich, who's here with her peeps as well, and books. We're very honored for that, as well as the panelists. At this moment here, we're officially opening this wonderful photo exhibit, which represents 29 of the 44 photos that, thanks to Larry Bush, a dear friend and former colleague and the editor of Jewish Currents magazine, put together. And I've asked Larry to say a few words of that, as well as guess which 15 photographs are not up on the wall. That's part of just the trick for you. Oh, you know better. Okay. So before Larry says any more comments, just an invitation for Rabbi Yael to give us a blessing to officially open our exhibit.
All right, so let us stand in the light of the 7th day of Hanukkah and Rosh Chodesh Tevet, which is today, and call forth the light of love, light of peace, lights of compassion, lights of wisdom, lights of grace, lights of relationship, and lights of connection. And let us call forth the capacity in ourselves and the capacity with each other to bring forth goodness and blessing into the world. Here we are in this moment. Let the light, let the hope, let the compassion, let the healing go forth from here. And together, may we call forth a sense of reverent relationship with each other and with all being. And may the words of our mouths, the work of our hands, and the love of our hearts bring forth blessing and peace. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Well, just a moment of context before we activate Larry. You're always active, activate you in a greater context. One thing that wasn't part of the original exhibit with Gary Wildbacker's help, our manager of communication and membership, the first two panels there are ones that we created to give a context to this exhibit. Basically, looking at from our inception 26 years ago, plus or minus, as a spiritual community. And on the opposite wall, dedicated to Brian Walt, our founding rabbi, Heschel and King, what the amazing part is, I didn't measure this beforehand, but a great miracle happened here, that the 29 panels we created fit perfectly and ended right before our Heschel King piece. We neither took one nor added one to make that happen there. So we were in guidance mode. For that. So from our inception, we've been a community committed to social justice, to economic and environmental justice, and acts of loving kindness, and across faith and socioeconomic and racial lines. And in particularly, in the last couple of years, we've been, hitting the streets and organizing internally, whether it's the Black Lives Matter campaign, whether it's, religious cooperation, faith communities, our membership in Power, which is now grown to a 46 congregation size, social justice, interfaith, and I see there's a few peeps here from our fellow travelers in that regard. And, also appreciating Matt Pillacher, who's got his eye on everything right now, and in fact, I'm embedding his name in the filming that he's doing because Matt and his wife Karen are members, and and it was, when I first met Matt, it was the documentary film Broken on All Sides about mass incarceration of the African-American community in here that debuted here and gave birth to what's now called our moved from the NewJimCrow group, working group, to ending mass incarceration group. So there's a lot of different areas that we're trying to tackle this, and what a week it's been. It feels like such a bracha, a blessing to have you here, Larry, this last night of Hanukkah, for all of us to be together in a week which we've seen some acts of prejudice, where we've rallied around our Muslim brothers and sisters, where we've walked the streets of the city for vigils against Islamophobia, where we have had the privilege with pride to light a multi-denominational Chanukiah in Rittenhouse Square downtown, and to feel the pride of being 200 Jews and allies there for us and not feel afraid. To feel that sense of pride and that exposure. Not that we didn't have internalized depression moments, believe me, but we all like, should we be out here so exposed? But even with that we felt that sense of confidence and allyship, so that we're here. And here in our community, where our community is not monolithic, where we have members both Jewish and not, children who are from different racial backgrounds and faith backgrounds, etc. So we as Mishkan Shalom embrace and increasingly are growing in that diversity. So that's the context that made this a slam dunk when we started this conversation some time ago, and now we've been able to manifest it. So I hand the talking stick over to you.
Thank you. So hi, I'm really happy to see the show hanging. As an editor, this is the first time in a long time I've been edited, those 16 missing placards, but it's okay. So I edit the 70-year-old magazine, which I really urge you to take home with you, so I don't have to, Jewish Currents, which is a long-lived, progressive, secular, mostly Jewish magazine with a proud history. Lots of things I wouldn't say we have a proud history of, through the decades there have been a lot of political blunders, but a proud history of solidarity with the Black Liberation Movement in all of its various phases and lives since 1946 when the magazine began. And I knew that Mississippi Freedom Summer's 50th anniversary was coming in 2014. In 1964 I was 12 years old, and what I remembered of Freedom Summer was, thank God I'm only 12 years old and I don't have to go. It was like, it seemed like an incredibly brave and fearful thing to do. And I was one of the only times I remember being a little kid, relieved at being a little kid, as opposed to wanting to be older. At the time, in the middle of 2013, Mark Levy, who had been down in Meridian, Mississippi during Freedom Summer, contacted me as a reader of the magazine and said, I have all of these snapshots of Mississippi Freedom Summer that have never been published. Many of them are at Queens College in an archive, but they've never been published. Why doesn't Jewish Currents ... So the first thing I did is I sat with Mark Levy and Dorothy Zellner, who had been staff for SNCC for more than 2 years in Mississippi, and a couple of other folks who were involved in the movement in that time, and just basically casually interviewed them to educate me and to tell me what to read and so on. And then I went ahead and spent those months putting together what was a special issue of Jewish Currents, not exclusively dedicated to, but including a very large section of Mark's and other photographers' Freedom Summer photographs. Snapshots more than photographs. They were, these people were not photographers, so to speak. At the same time, I was finishing Michelle Alexander's NewJimCrow, and the magazine and our congregation in Woodstock and my wife Susan and other folks in our community were getting involved in trying to create a Jewish conversation about mass incarceration as an issue that we should relate to. We did a book study at the Woodstock congregation, which turned out a lot of people, was excellent. We began interacting with some churches and other organizations in our area. We got in touch with Trua and other rabbinical sources. We did a mailing to all of the Reconstructionists and all of the Reform rabbis saying, this is an issue, this is how we're dealing with it, would you like to be in touch with us? And we began organizing around it. So that this became, from the old Jim Crow to the new Jim Crow. It wasn't just an historical piece about Mississippi Freedom Summer, but it was the continuity, which Michelle Alexander had very clearly identified between the old Jim Crow and this new form of Jim Crow. For me, it was intellectually, emotionally a transformative year insofar as I always knew about racial disparity in the criminal justice system. I always knew, I taught in prison, I knew who was there, but I had always seen it as, well, poverty turns to crime, turns to incarceration, that's why. And that it's not that there isn't racism implicit in that, what's producing the poverty, but I always thought it was still punishment to fit the crime. And it wasn't until I read Michelle Alexander that I really understood, no, that's not what it's about. It is about social control. It's about, kids of color getting busted for things that my kids would be busted for and released, or not busted at all. And that it was a deeply institutional discriminatory system, that her use of the phrase Jim Crow was not objectionable as some people were feeling it was. So we put together this issue of Jewish Currents, and then we turned it into a traveling exhibit. What's missing, just so you know, are mostly photographs of Mississippians and other participants in Freedom Summer. Just in brief, Freedom Summer, basically, as I understand it, involved about 700 Northerners joining about 300 Southerners under the auspices of SNCC to register voters and to create freedom schools, educational venues, to inspirit the movement in Mississippi and to bring a national focus. And as you probably know, before the program actually began, within the first 24 hours, Goodman, Schwerner, and Cheney were kidnapped and killed, beaten and shot and killed. Carolyn Goodman, Andrew Goodman's mother, had been a life subscriber to our magazine for years and years and years. It's that kind of magazine she would be. And when, in fact, someone was finally prosecuted and found guilty for the crime, we had an interview with Carolyn in the magazine. So as I say, there's precedent in Jewish Currents. So the last word is the advertisement. Jewish Currents, please take a copy. This issue that I brought, I don't have the civil rights issue, we're sold out of them. This issue is entirely devoted to Jewish resistance to Nazism. It's a remarkable issue because it's still a little discussed topic. There are at least 50 incidents of armed resistance described in that magazine. It's only $18 for a new subscription, and you should take it and make use of it. It's a great resource. And I thank Mishkan for hanging the show. You've got the space for it.
So one thing to note in appreciation with you, Larry, that Larry didn't mention is this is now ours. So Larry has made this available. We have purchased this. So it is by creating it as opposed to just originals, by creating these copies that Larry and Jewish Currents have enabled communities to purchase this and have this so that we can loan it out, I guess, as we see fit. We can bring in some of the other photos, rotate things. We have no immediate display coming in right away, so that we're going to leave this. And I remember when Ali Abu Awad, a leading nonviolent Palestinian activist leader, came here the first time and walked out, and he saw this poster. He started crying because he said, "These are my leaders, but I never saw I would see them in a synagogue."
So of course, I forgot to say, stupidly, that of those 700 Northerners who came south to Mississippi, more than a third were Jews. The question of what kind of Jews functioning with what kind of consciousness is a complicated question, but the Jewish participation in the civil rights movement was remarkable and is, unfortunately, for many reasons, unsung. And this exhibit focuses on that because it's unsung. In the 2-hour documentary from Mississippi Freedom Summer, as we began to watching it, I said to the folks I was watching with, I said, watch. There's not going to be one mention of the word Jewish in this entire documentary. And there were all of these people on camera who I knew to be Jews, and I knew how to identify themselves in their interviews as Jewish, but it was not in there.
Yeah.
So it's a complicated story as to what motivated people of Jewish consciousness and background to participate, and why that history tends to be quieted down, having a lot to do with simply we live in America, and Jewish is not a identity card stamp. Jewish is not often acknowledged in many venues. Sorry, I just wanted to add that.
It's perfect, and I want to make sure that we don't take any time away from the panel and with Simone. So I think these
It's a blood art magazine because in this magazine the stories are told in many ways. The poetry is fabulous. The artwork is fabulous. Each issue really is a work of art on many different levels. So I really want to recommend it.
Thanks.
Thank you. Unsolicited.
Is part of the reason why the disproportionate presence of Jewish people in the movement is unsung? Is part of that reason that many of those people were left-wing, either red diaper babies, or in some way very close to the left?
As I say, it's a very complicated discussion, which I don't want to open up here, because I would say, yeah, kind of, but there were plenty of people from the Reform movement participating. There were plenty of other folks participating, and it's a complicated question.
I think what's important to take out of the exhibit, and I hope you'll start over there and work your way through, many times our interfaith faith network power, the Clergy Caucus meets here now once a month. So I'm really excited to see the next month they come and look around and go, whoa, because many of them are African-American clergy leaders in our community. But the piece is to notice where it ends, because memory is very important to us as a Jewish people. Nostalgia is not a Jewish value. So this is about remembering, and it ends with our issues today. And that's really what's most important, I think, between this and even the Wavelength program, is what we're involved with now. Because coming with Jewish nostalgia to our brothers and sisters about why we should be recognized or what we have done is not so much the cachet when class and other issues have shifted and are at stake. So I wanted just to raise that up. See the influence about being around priests and ministers for a lot of my days now. I want to raise that up, the fact that where we started and where we're ending is about our ongoing engagement, not only as a retrospective. And I know that's important in how you structured the show too.